Welcome to Fierce Compassion Podcast. My name is Brett William Simpson and I'm your host. If you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, if you're second on your own priority list and you're seeking a little bit of self-compassion and self-love, if you're looking to build resilience emotionally, mentally, physically, and even spiritually, then this is the podcast for you. I'm a spontaneous remission cancer survivor, and over the past 13 years, I've learned why some people pass from cancer and while others with the same diagnosis, with the same prognosis, end up living these amazing and fulfilling lives. So I tend to use very big words now. Psychoneuroimmunology, epigenetics, neuroplasticity to sound very clever, but more so to really explain and demystify the magic, or actually the science of what really feeds our health and what starves disease. So Fierce Compassion Podcast shows up people who have wisdom in compassion, in healing, and in being fully human. So if you're willing and capable of taking responsibility for your healing and life, then this is the podcast for you. So today I had the privilege of interviewing Robert Paddock, who has the most incredible bio. So I'm going to read this verbatim, and then I'm going to explain to you the real reason why I've asked Rob to have this conversation with me today. So Robert is the co-founder of Get Smarter, which is an online educational company that has educated over 200,000 working professionals from 154 countries around the world and partners with universities such as Harvard, Cambridge, MIT, Oxford, and Stanford. Get Smarter was sold to a NASDAQ-listed 2U in 2017. Rob is a founding board member of Ingenie, which is Africa's first edtech incubator. He's an executive director of Hubble Studios, which is an educational technology agency in Cape Town, and an advisor to a number of online educational companies in Africa and abroad. Rob is now the founder and CEO of Valencia Institute, which is a global private online high school offering a curriculum recognized by the world's leading universities. Robert is also the founding trustee of Ibodi Trust, a bold project to create a new blueprint for delivering high-quality, affordable education to students throughout South Africa who need it most. Well, that's pretty friggin' impressive. But the real reason I've asked Rob to have this chat with me today on this podcast is because of his focus internally on personal growth and his dedication to integrating himself into the best version that he can be in this world, and how rare it is that leaders in the world might be as willing to grow internally as they build organizations externally. And I'm a big believer in that in order to change the world, we need to change ourselves and to look inside. And for me, Rob is a brilliant example of what I'm beginning to understand as the integrated masculine. And in this talk, we focus on unpacking this concept of healthy integrated masculine energy. We also look into nature around how it balances its own ecosystems, and Rob brings in this really interesting example around wolves. We explore the internal balance around the feminine and the masculine energy, in spite of what gender you might be, and we touch on what Rob calls balance measurement, which is a tool that he uses in order to understand how he's balancing his energy during the course of the period of time. And there's a really interesting energy shift at about minute 50 of this podcast where I really have to own my own vulnerability and step into my own version of moving towards a more integrated masculine energy. This conversation was an absolute privilege to have with Rob. He's such a good human being, and I really hope there is some resonance for you in around the topics and the themes and the flow of the conversation. And I wish you a fantastic day. Okay, Mr. Rob Paddock, thank you very much for agreeing to this. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time, and I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate the journey that you and I have taken, or I've joined you in taking with a group of men who are exploring, to my experience, a new version of what it means to be masculine in a world that is changing and demanding or asking of a different experience and role, as I see it, for the masculine in the world that is being birthed in this really interesting time around COVID-19 and all the changes that are upon us. So for you, Rob, I'd love to just get your thoughts, and we haven't had this conversation outside of this podcast directly around what your feeling is of the masculine that was and moving into this newer version, and the things like Black Lives Matters, and not specifically, but around how they are changing our perspective around how we as men are creating and leading and exploring and honoring ourselves, but in ways that are more, I suppose, inclusive, and that have more compassion and inclusiveness in how we operate within our families, within our communities, in our businesses, and in the spaces that really are asking for a bit of a breath and a shift in perspective and changes around the masculine. So if I could just get I suppose, your thoughts around what I've just said, and anything that might inspire you around that, Rob.
Yeah, Brett, and thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's a big question. I think that probably in the course of our conversation today, we'll take a couple of twists and turns in this direction. I think almost as a starting point for me, there's a necessity for us to start just perhaps providing a layer of nuance and perhaps sophistication to the description of what it is to be masculine, what it is to be feminine, and so on. And for me, I think it's absolutely necessary that we start to make a distinction between what would be more, let's call it like anatomically considered to be a male or female, and these energetic expressions of masculinity and energetic expressions of femininity. And if we had to take it in the most generalized archetypal form, one would think about masculinity as perhaps more aggressive. It would be more competitive. It would be more single pointed and focused. It would be more kind of like standing in the front and leading from the front. We could also go into some of the more generally negatively kind of described aspects of masculinity, this kind of toxic masculinity, where it's kind of like these same character traits / behaviors taken to their ultimate extremes, competitiveness to the point of not caring about the impact that it has on those around you and the environment, and so much more. A degree of logic that bypasses any kind of engagement with the emotional that's happening. Like, I mean, that would be kind of in the domain of masculine energy. Those would be some of the sorts of descriptions that would often be used. Whereas on the feminine side, we would often talk about things like empathy. We would talk about nurture. We would talk about intuition. We would talk about kind of broad community inclusiveness, a kind of sense of like this like warm wraparound. And in the more kind of negative expression, we might think about kind of the victims, the powerlessness, the codependency, the neediness, those sorts of things. And again, I'm not putting absolute labels on these, but I'm trying to put a bit of color to these descriptions that are often used, such as masculine and feminine. And at least by my estimation, Brett, I think that a lot of what my own journey has been about as it relates to masculinity and femininity over the last couple of years has been the need to look at those character traits not as being specific to a gender, although they are more amplified typically more amplified on one side of the gender spectrum or the other, but to see these as a broad spectrum of emotions and activities that we can tap into, that we can make use of in different circumstances. My world, a lot of where this sort of thing plays out is in the world of business. And often there's this rhetoric around, it's like toxic masculinity. We need to tear it all down, and we need to start again, and we need to build this thing up. And my personal view is that I think that's too low resolution thinking. I think we need to rather be engaging in a view that says there are different circumstances that arrive, and I'm just going to talk about the context of work for a second, but we can transpose this into just about any area of life. There's different circumstances that arise in a work situation for which different types of responses are appropriate. So let's say that you are a business that is in absolute crisis. COVID-19, let's go back a couple months. COVID-19 has just hit. You're in the tourism business, and excuse my French, shit's about to go down.
Sure.
Like things are about to come tumbling down, and the only real question is survival. Can you keep the ship afloat?
Yeah.
What you're not necessarily looking for in those sorts of dire circumstances is a highly consultative, let's check with everyone how they're feeling, let's do a big round table around this. What you need is decisive leadership. You need someone who takes a view, who is willing to do the hard things as they are required for the benefit of the business overall. And that's at least by my estimation, that's a perfectly suitable response for a circumstance such as that. But let's say that you're in a business that is in let's say a fairly steady state, and there is some discomfort because there's been too much value that's been accrued at the top and it's not being distributed accordingly, or that there's kind of too much concentration of leadership power in one area of the organization. The appropriate response to that, at least by my estimation, is a far more inclusive approach. It's a kind of approach which says no, like we need to broaden our engagement here. We really need to tap into our empathy so that people can feel heard, so that we don't get this massive divide between those at the top and those in the rest of the organization, and so on and so on. And I think we could go through lots of examples like that, Brett, but for me, the really important thing is that there's no one appropriate way of operating, whether they are more masculine type behaviors or feminine type behaviors. There's no one appropriate way of operating. In fact, it's a blend across the spectrum based on the circumstances that we're engaging with. Now, what I would say is that in the world of work, what has typically happened is that the masculine type traits have been overtly rewarded and encouraged above those of the feminine type traits. So what you've got in a lot of corporate cultures is like this incessant competitive attitude, which is just like, no matter what, I'm going to burn myself into the ground. I'm going to shove other people out of my way in order to get to the top, in order to accumulate as much as possible, and off we go. And even when women are entering the more competitive side of the workplace and entering leadership positions and so on, what's often been rewarded is more masculine type behavior from females in the workplace. And for me, that's a huge missed opportunity. I think, at least as it relates to the new masculine, and again, I'm talking about the workplace, but I think that this can be applied in just about every sphere of life. It's about that integration. It's about that balance over time based on the different circumstances and different contexts that we find ourselves in, where you've got leaders and you've got team members who can tap into both. Who can tap into, I don't even want to call it both because that makes it sound quite binary. Let's say that who can tap into the full spectrum of emotional tools that are available to them in order to appropriately engage with the circumstances that they find themselves in. And that for me is the great journey right now. For me, biologically as a male, I recognize my tendency more towards the kind of masculine type activities. And so I've really been trying to work hard on myself to engage in the more intuitive, to engage in the more, when someone comes to me with a problem, I'm trying not just to go straight into logic and be like, okay, cool, this is how we're going to solve it. It's like, no, listen, like create space. No, people don't necessarily just need you to come and give them answers. And this is just one expression of kind of what would be considered more masculine, is kind of like logic. Let's get to if you're giving me a problem, it's because it's for me to give you a solution. And so let's jump straight into the solution. Whereas the more feminine would typically be like, it's about the expression. It's about the fact that I have the space just to talk about things. And actually often what ends up happening, if you just shut your mouth and listen, is that I'm able to come to my own conclusions, figure my way through this myself. And in the process, I feel heard and I feel nurtured. And there's something really magical about that. Oh. And so again, it's like, it's all of it together. No one, I don't particularly like kind of toxic masculinity, or at least that expression. I think it's maybe a more appropriate description of it is a overt reliance on masculine traits, a amplified expression of masculinity at the expense of the more feminine traits. And I really do believe across us as humans and across all of nature, it's in the integration of both and finding that middle way on aggregate that is just so powerful.
I'm really glad you brought in business, Rob, because that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you. I mean, you're a very successful businessman. And I love that you speak of, you know, you resonate more with that masculine side of things, and then the integration or that spectrum that you're exploring, that I've experienced from you. Where I come from, which is fascinating, when you speak of, you know, you speak of anatomically, you know, man and female, and then, but on, I suppose the way that some people show up, like you mentioned, speaking from the masculine, it's more comfortable. And funnily enough, I'm kind of a little bit more aligned to the feminine. I'm stretching actually to the masculine, which is why this conversation for me is already incredibly rich. So for you, how have you been able to consciously bring about more access to that spectrum that you speak of? So you've spoken, and thank you very much for speaking for your honest experience and vulnerability, which I find as the most powerful tool for me to access, or to, I suppose, to access more of the feminine qualities of compassion and listening. And but like, what have you experienced, or what has been those things that have helped you open up to more of that spectrum on the other side of the masculine, or the opposite side of the masculine?
So, I mean, thank you, Brett. I think it's there's definitely a number of different contributing factors. One is that I've been in therapy for quite a long time, weekly therapy with a wonderful therapist who I trust implicitly. I mean, a simple thing with that, and again, I don't want to say that, like, just because I see a female therapist, it's like she's going to bring out the more feminine, but there is often that tendency, and I purposely sought out a female therapist because that part of my journey has been this kind of integration over time. And I think that the role that therapy plays, at least for me, is an opportunity to step back from the emotions that you're experiencing, from the thought processes that you're experiencing, and that you feel so wrapped up in, and be able to take a step back from those and view them a little bit more objectively. Speak about things in a space that puts a little bit of distance between yourself and those thoughts, and be able to, as a result, see them a bit more clearly. But I think this is something that my intention in going into therapy, one of the intentions was about more of this integration. So inviting my therapist to open those spaces and to watch for that, and to engage on topics that relate to that has been really fundamental for me. I guess there's a few other areas of life. One, as it relates to things like business, I've been very conscious in building a team around me that has a kind of equitable distribution of kind of more overtly masculine type traits and more overtly kind of feminine type traits. And that, for me, in the context of business, means that there's a richness to our thinking every time our exco sits around the table. Yeah. There's a richness to the thinking by virtue of the diversity that's in the room. And I feel like it's what I'm talking about is incredibly practical, but in the end, this stuff is very practical. It comes down to, like, are you able to tap into these kind of different leanings? Are you able to make sure that each one of these perspectives and expressions are going to be in the room when you're having a conversation about a topic that needs a decision? And then, Brett, I think that that one of the paths that you and I have walked is in this group called Men Who Meditate, which a mutual friend of ours, Jean, and myself started a little while ago. And the thinking with that group was very much that I mean, and it was, as selfish as it was altruistic, that there is a necessity, particularly for men, to find a safe space in order to tap more into the feminine. And what seems to happen again and again, and I don't know this as a kind of psychological conclusion, but at least by my estimation, what tends to happen is that men around women tend to amplify their masculine traits. There's this desire to impress. There's this desire to move towards alpha, to be sexually attractive, whatever the kind of biological and evolutionary drives are. I've seen again and again that the tendency seems to amplify when you're around a group of females. What I've found that with men is that if you're able to create a shared sense of trust, and then lead by example with vulnerability, the floodgates just open, like in a staggering way. When there's trust in the room and there's a group of guys who are able to start really expressing the emotions that they feel, the more kind of, let's call it the more kind of feminine side. That's the vulnerabilities, it's the areas where they feel powerless, the areas where they feel weak, etc. But actually being able to talk about it and put it on the table and share it. I mean, I'd be interested in your view. I feel like we've seen some amazing things happen in that group. And that's not because they can't happen with females. I'm certainly not saying that if there were females in the room. I think that's absolutely possible. But I think for a lot of us, there's this need to kind of build a bridge into that space where we start to trust ourselves and our emotions and our and the fact that we're not going to be booted out as being not good enough just because we have things that where we feel really insecure or unsafe in putting them on the table. So yeah, I think it's been a fairly multifaceted kind of journey, this kind of discovery of masculine and feminine bread, and I certainly don't think it's anywhere near any sort of conclusion. I think this is a fundamental aspect of life. It's like this engagement between these energetic forces, and constantly shifting between them based on the circumstances, with, at least for me, with the hope that we can start to increasingly find the middle way, where you've got this kind of rich toolkit that you can tap into based on the circumstances and not have to overtly rely on one end of the spectrum or another.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, Rob, I'd really like to acknowledge the fact that you are open and courageous and vulnerable about a therapist. And I'm on this vendetta to desensitize people to the value of therapy, because I've been in therapy for 3.5 years, and it's been the most absolutely amazing process of self-acceptance that I've ever been through. And it's just expanded so many different aspects of myself, and I felt like I've actually been able to kind of grow the side of my masculine that I've been wanting to kind of explore through therapy, and then through what you're speaking about now. I mean, I through this common experience that we had in a time away with our group, the safety and the trust to be able to speak about things that are, for me, the most fearful things that I could have ever imagined 10 years ago at a bar with the boys, drinking beer and you know, talking about cars and adventure and you know, it's being able to share vulnerably with a group of men the things that I fear or I struggle with, and to be witnessed and supported around that. It has been, and I'm still at the moment, I think, integrating the value of what this group that you and Jean so beautifully pulled together, and now has kind of is growing into something absolutely phenomenal, that is redefining the masculine for me. And when you have that, when I experience that trust and that vulnerability to be able to kind of speak my truth, it just, there's a level of acceptance that happens within me.
There's a lesson in nature that for me is just so beautiful. And I came across this the other day, Breda. You may know that I really love wolves. I for multiple reasons am just deeply attracted to them. And I've been reading this beautiful book called The Wisdom of Wolves. And one of the most amazing points that gets made is that wolves are often seen as the most kind of hierarchical and patriarchal kind of organizations of animals. And it's very clear that there's kind of like the alpha male, and then there's the female, and then everyone and the pack follows that. And sometimes there's a breakaway of a younger male, and so on. And this is seen in quite a kind of hard, kind of masculine light. It's like there's a leader at the front, and that's how it works. And it's about power, and it's about situational authority, and so on. And something that I found so beautiful in reading about this is that they've been following multiple packs of wolves in North America on the West Coast. And what they've seen consistently now across multiple generations is that where an alpha is relying overtly on dominance and physical power in order to assert his place as the alpha, what ends up happening is that coalitions of other wolves, other male wolves, get formed. They attack the alpha and they ultimately take him out. The alpha males who sustain their tenure as alphas are the ones who, at the right times, will defend the pack to the death, but at other times are the ones that are overtly looking out for the best interests of the groups, are making sure that if they're bringing back meat, that it's in fact the eldest or the youngest that eat first.
Okay.
And there's this expression of kind of sharing and inclusiveness that is so integral to them sustaining their tenure as alpha. And I think there's this kind of spirit of balance and reciprocity and so on that is baked into the DNA of how we function as sentient beings. That's, it's hard to know exactly where that comes from, but any overt expression on one side of the spectrum or the other will ultimately, in the natural order of things, get taken out and get replaced with something that gets closer towards a kind of midway expression.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
And one of the reasons I love looking to nature for inspiration is because I think that as humans, we often intellectually over-engineer a lot. And a lot of what we've created in this world, in Yuval Harari's kind of words, is actually just shared fiction. Companies don't really exist. They only exist because enough humans agree that there's this thing called a company and here's a brand and so on. Laws, country borders, etc. None of them actually exist except for in the shared fiction that we as humans attach to them. And I think whilst that creates a lot of power, a lot of wonderful, beautiful things, what it also does is it almost takes us away from first principles. It takes us away from natural law and order. So I love looking to nature for examples as to how we might conduct ourselves and how we might live. And for me, wolves are just one of the most wonderful groups of species to kind of track and take note of how they operate.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's a beautiful example. I've been watching a lot of nature series of late and just seeing the intelligence that sits within these symbiotic systems that govern not only their species, but other species. It's phenomenal. I mean, I got sent something recently around how a pack of wolves has actually engineered the shifting of a specific river because they influence so much of the ecosystems along this area that it's actually shifted the whole ecosystem in the most beautiful and incredible way.
And I love that one. I think that's the Yellowstone National Park example you might be referring to. And one of the things I love about that is that, wolves as predators were often seen as kind of like the menaces, and they were hunted out of Yellowstone as a result. But without that more, let's call it aggressive kind of carnivorous instinct to go and kill and to go after big species and so on, what ended up happening is that the whole ecosystem got completely out of whack. And I think again, like it's this example, or it's another expression of the fact that like nature, it's about the balance across these multiple ways of operating, multiple kind of perspectives, species, animals, etc. Any time that there's too much overt expression of one side of the continuum or another, there's going to be unbalance, and there's going to be issues that arise. And again, I'm not wanting to beat this point to death, but like really, I think that a huge part of the journey for us as sentient beings is finding the middle way.
Yeah, I mean, it's balance, isn't that one of the trickiest things to kind of find? I mean, you're speaking to masculine and coming to this way, and I'm coming from the feminine and coming to this way, and just finding that sweet spot that kind of allows for both to be honored. And it just also reminds me of it. Like, I've done quite a bit of process work around the masculine, and I've found it interesting after having gone through a couple of processes. Like, we worked with archetypes, so the archetypes of the king. So you're speaking of the wolves in a specific sort of a way around, there's a level of responsibility for the pack. There's a level of kind of leadership, of decisiveness that you've spoken to as well. So that's essentially kind of the nobility of the king or the leader, which is a masculine trait. Then there's the the adventurer. So there's there's us exploring the unknown, expanding. Society is riddled with examples of us getting to the moon and now going to Mars. And I mean, you and I are similar this way. It's also, like doing the Ironman or something like a big race. It's just, there's something that kind of taps into a part of your existence that just excitement starts to come when we push ourselves to see what is possible. So there's that aspect, and then there's one that I wasn't so acutely aware of, which was one that we dealt with around the inner child, and that was around the sensitivity, I suppose, or the softness and innocence of the child that kind of sits within inside of us, and the emotions that like a child, they'll honor the emotions quite strictly. If they're upset, they'll cry. If they're happy, they'll laugh, and just this kind of explorative and openness to anything that happens. And then the last one that we kind of played with was this wildness of honoring something that is just, like, I am the descendant of a wolf in some regard, and I need to honor that sometimes in a mountain. It's just, for me, like you speak about balance, and how do you take, and this is a conscious journey that I've been on for about 6 years, taking those archetypes and integrating them into my life in a world that doesn't have that nature connection. At least, objectively looking at our cities that are kind of disconnected from the natural ways, which again, I love and acknowledge that you've gone back to nature. When you look at nature, you can see these things in balance, and you can see these things rectify themselves, and you can see this level of kind of natural ways of showing up with the different species. For me, I suppose my curiosity is, how do we, in the way that we've built our societies and our cultures and our communities, which seems to be kind of this urge of a reset, of a shift, how do we take those kind of archetypes and integrate those into our lives, that we might show up as men in a way that honors inclusivity, again, that honors who we actually are. Since I've known those archetypes, I've incorporated those in, like, oh, okay, I'm going wild camping, so there's the wildness. I'm with my therapist, so I'm dealing with a little bit more of the inner child. I'm kind of with my amazing fiance, and I'm kind of trying to kind of coordinate where we're going as a couple, and that's more of I'm serving us as a couple moving. And I mean, Rob, are there any areas in your life that you've consciously, I suppose, well, where you are around where this masculinity might be going or heading, or the insight in where you are around, and I loved your example around, you surrounding yourself with people who have the elements of all of those aspects. I think that's so powerful and practical and inclusive in directing your business. I mean, have you got any wisdom around where we are as a species?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about wisdom, but certainly have some thoughts, Brett. The one thing I think is helpful to think about is the unit of analysis that we use when we think about something like balance. So if we are kind of are agreeing that there's this kind of spectrum of behavior or emotional types and so on, activities that are kind of between masculine and more overtly feminine, and that this effectively actually is a tool, a spectrum of tools that we can tap into for different circumstances, and that ultimately the kind of midway expression, the kind of balance, is what is going to drive a lot of healing, a lot of what we need in society to make it more just, more equitable, etc., etc. I think the unit of analysis that we view is really important. So let me make that very practical. Okay. If you hope that every single day you're going to be able to find perfect balance, and your unit of analysis is 24 hours, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure. If we're saying, like, okay, I'm going to be like, in every day I'm going to have like a beautiful balance between masculine and feminine, it's all going to balance out to a perfect midway point in a day, it's like, good luck, man. Like I just don't think life works like that. I even don't think that it's necessarily in the course of a week. I think more generally, I try to think about most things in my life. The unit of analysis that is most helpful is the increment of a month. In the course of a month, if what I know as an example for myself, and this is something that my wonderful wife Ash has agreed with. Once a week, I know I need to go out and I just need to go get lost in the mountain. Like I need to go, that spirit of adventure, that wildness that you spoke about, like I need that. I know that that needs to be expressed. And that's not actually very, very well expressed if like Ash comes with me on the mountain, because Ash doesn't want to like take the turns into little crevices that no one's been to before, or like go on that steep ridge, or she doesn't want to do that stuff. And that's totally fine. I need to do that. Yeah. I also know that I need to go and surf with the boys and like just go throw myself in the ocean and go do some irresponsible things every night. Like I need to do that.
Yeah.
Equally, I know that I need to go to therapy once a week. I want to go to therapy once a week. I want to sit in the kind of round table of the Men Who Meditate group once a week. I want to find myself in spaces and places where I can be incredibly nurturing to those around me and so on. And so, but the unit of analysis, coming back to that point, for me, the helpful unit of analysis is a month. It's like at the end of a month, can I sit back and ask myself the question, was there a balanced expression on both sides? Or was in fact this way too much on one end of the spectrum or another? Because again, over time, what ends up happening is if the scale is not being balanced out, you will move into disharmony. You will move into a state of distress, because at least, again, a personal belief, we were meant to come into balance with these sorts of character traits. I mean, let's use a silly example. If the Men Who Meditate group had to spend all day, every day together all the time, like, also like not necessarily a particularly good way to think about it if we did that for a full month, but for an evening a week, like absolutely brilliant. So for me, Brett, the kind of thinking about a month and the expression across that month is really important. And then giving yourself the sorts of rhythms and routines. I like the word rhythm, incidentally. Like it's a rhythm that at the end of every month you come to and you ask yourself a couple of key questions. If one of your journeys has been between the expression of masculine and feminine, as one of my journeys has been, that's a hell of a helpful question to ask yourself at the end of the month. Another question that I've asked myself at the end of every month, which is as a result of some pretty strong burnout in my previous business that we ran and eventually sold. Am I working in a sustainable way? Like, can I see myself with this month and the sort of activity that's taking place? Can I see myself doing this in 10 years' time? If the answer is yes, brilliant. Like, if the answer is no, what do I need to change in order to turn that into a yes? Yeah. If I had to do that in the unit of analysis of a week, sometimes you just have a week that is busier than others, and like you need to accept. At least for me, I think I need to accept that. Or a day that is I'm working till 9 o'clock at night, and I might not sleep that well that night. But for me, it feels impractical to try and find that perfect balance every single day or every single week. But a month is like long enough that it gives you some diversity, but not so long that you let yourself get too far down the path and to the point of no return. So it's a bit of a ramble about something.
Not at all.
I hope it's helpful.
No, that unit of measure is very powerful, because I mean, as you know, the work that I'm in around health and healing, there's these 10 themes that I've kind of accumulated through amazing practitioners that have evidence-based and scientifically supported kind of techniques that support well-being to avoid stress and overwhelm. And especially in this time, I'm also going through a bit of a space in how much is too much of this and too much of that. And what you're saying here is kind of a bit of a lightning bolt for me around, wow, that month is quite a beautiful framework to be able to go, okay, cool. So I want to build a life that doesn't need a holiday, essentially, because also susceptible to those stress levels as well. I know I get slightly off topic, but it just provides, for me, just like a good amount of space and time to be able to kind of get all of the good ingredients into that mix, How did you come up with that? And can I ask, this is a very selfish question, how do you structure that? I mean, do you take dedicated and intentional time to be able to go, let me take a look at my month in review. And how do you do that, Rob, practically?
Yeah, so it's again coming back to this principle of kind of looking to nature for inspiration.
I love this, Bruce.
If you think even about the kind of month and the moon cycle is not perfectly aligned, but in terms of the unit of the increments, like 28 days ish.
Yeah.
A moon waxes all the way to full moon and wanes all the way to back to new moon. And like in that process, actually, if you look at that, is balance. It's like it goes from nothing to fully expressed back to nothing. And like in that is balance. And that's beautiful, like, and I think for me, a month is, if you really wanted to be strict about this, you might do it with moon cycles. But I think just practically in the world of business and that sort of thing, like we think about months, we think about quarters, we think about financial years, etc. So it's helpful. Like the month is a perfectly good unit of analysis for me, and it fits the criteria. Greta, I think so much of this comes down to intentionality. Hey, like you need to put something in your diary at the end of the month. If you're exploring two key questions or three key questions, it's like you need to codify that stuff. You need to put that into some sort of rhythm in your life. That means that you have an opportunity to step back, to reflect. I mean, this is what, at least in part, what therapy is, right? Like you step back, you reflect, you engage with people that you trust and that you're accountable to. And in this sort of process, that ultimately, I'd like to think actually that ultimately you can become your own therapist. And that if you set yourself to certain tasks or certain things that you're working on, that you get to the end of a month and you're able to create enough distance between yourself and the emotions and the activities that you've experienced that month to be able to engage with them objectively and to be able to come up with a new plan for the month ahead, if that needs to change, or to continue the same course. So for me, there's I've sometimes been, people have pointed the finger at me saying that it's kind of too much rigor, and I think that can be a fair criticism. It's like too much structure. And so, the sort of thing that my wife and I do on a weekly basis is that on a Sunday night, we'll actually sit down and we'll plan our week ahead together. And we'll say, cool, like what's happening on Monday, what's happening on Tuesday, what's happening on Wednesday. And that's fine. That's almost like the hygiene factor. What's really important about that weekly meeting are things like, well, what night's our date night this week?
Yeah.
Let's put it in the you calendar. Because if you think it's just gonna happen, it's gonna be kind of beautiful, spontaneous moments, and it's all gonna come together good luck with that.
Yeah.
Really, an even more important question that we ask ourselves at the end of every week is, well, how can I love you better this coming week?
Sure.
And it's a really practical question, actually.
Yeah.
And it's often not like grand sweeping gestures and that sort of thing. Often the sort of feedback that Ash has for me is like, wash the bloody dishes.
Yeah, no, that's fair. No, I picked that one up the other day, actually, myself again.
Yeah, but this stuff is important,
Yeah.
It's like the degree to which we are willing to be intentional and we're willing to put certain rhythms and so on into our lives is that it's almost like when you codify or put enough rhythms in place, it creates such a strong base layer for your existence, either with your partner, as in the example I've given you with Ash, or in your own kind of psyche and so on, that on top of that, a lot of spontaneity can take place, a lot of freedom. I mean, the something else that I say fairly often is actually that routine sets you free. It's like when you put in enough of the hygiene factors and you put enough of that in place so that kind of base level structure is taken care of and that you're looking after the core requirements and so on. On top of that, God, there is so much freedom because you've taken care of the hygiene factors.
Absolutely, Orf. I didn't realize you'd be giving so much of your efficiency secrets out there, Rob, and I thank you for that, because that's just such a. I mean, it makes such. I heard that a quote from Will Smith. This one video around exactly that, around discipline. Well, he uses discipline. I like the fact that you use rhythm, because that almost kind of sets a kind of a more gentle, more accessible kind of tone around structure. That's incredibly valuable. But now I want to just jump back into Men Who Meditate, because this is something very special that I feel very privileged to be a part of, that has really already changed the way that I show up in masculine circles. I've noticed it in my kind of older friendship circles that I'm starting to show up in a different space. So I'm very curious to know for you, Rob. So if and I'm using this as almost like an example for what might be happening globally as well, because I do hear a calling for a lot of men going like, we need a safer space to be able to have these sort of conversations, to be connected in a different way, to be vulnerable, to be honest, to explore the spectrum. What would your vision be of these, of a group like Men Who Meditate, which is a group of guys who are doing a little bit of a kind of, I wouldn't say how would I describe it? From my experience. So it's a group of guys who have committed to exploring the truth of who they are in the masculine, with the support of other men on that journey, and flowing with what grows from that. And the rewards that have come from that already for me are just phenomenal. What would your intention be for a group like that, who for a group of, let's say, other men who are coming together to want to explore a better version of themselves, or a greater version of themselves in the masculine space? What would your ultimate vision be for something like the Men Who Meditate group, or that structure that you... And is this accurate? Is it intentionally created in order for this to be a growth area for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in many ways it was as selfish as it was altruistic.
Yeah.
It's like in starting that group. So I think one of the reflections that Jean and I had when we started the group was that you go into most yoga studios, you go into most meditation halls, and it's like 80% females, maybe 20% males. And one of the questions was, well, why is that? Like how is it possible that with a pretty much a 50-50 split in population, like how on earth is it like so overly represented with females and underrepresented with males? And part of starting Men Who Meditate was an exploration around that, without necessarily having a strong diagnosis or a strong view. It was just like, let's start and see if we can create something that men feel safe to come to, and that men, once they come and they start developing themselves and the relationships they have amongst the group and so on, let's see what happens, because I don't know, like I certainly am not, one of the things we've been very careful about positioning is that this is not something where there is an overt leader or a teacher and that everyone else is kind of followers and so on. It's very much a kind of peer-to-peer led group. So yeah, I think a few things for me. One, there seems to be, and this is a gut sense as opposed to anything that I genuinely understand. I think there's something quite baked into men from an evolutionary perspective, like the group of men that go out on the hunt for days and days, and the kind of trust and brotherhood that builds up over time, particularly when there's some sort of rite of passage associated with it, when there's some sort of shared challenge that the group has gone through and so on. There's a unifying bond and a strength that comes from that is incredibly primal and powerful. And I don't think that's something that we need to shy away from. I think one of the things I'm cautious about in all these discussions around masculinity and toxic masculinity and so on is that, like, somehow that the masculine should be exterminated, that the masculine should be put to the side because it's no use. And I think that is wrong, bloody wrong. I think that that's incredibly low resolution thinking. And yet the problem, of course, is that when it's only kind of expressed on the one end of the spectrum, and as it has been in for a lot of the world of business and sports and so on, then I think we find ourselves out of balance, and that's the big issue. So I guess my biggest hope for something like Men Who Meditate actually is that it's used as a bridge. It's used as a bridge for men to come into a space where they can start to tap into the full spectrum of emotions, the full spectrum of activity, in a space that quite primarily feels like a trusted space, and that creates that sense of that willingness to take the leaps, the emotional and intellectual leaps that are so important in accessing those different emotions, to the point where people can freely express the full range of emotions, whether they're with men, whether they're with women, in whatever racial context they might be. It's that comfort with the full spectrum that I think ultimately I'm interested in. So I don't. For me, it's not even like, I don't even know if men who meditate in the way that we have it now, Brett, would be that way in 2 years' time. Like I think in some ways it would actually be pretty cool if it's like men who meditate was a bridge towards a broader group of people, male, female, everything in between, who are interested in that self-expression. But again, coming back to the kind of loose diagnosis, I think that space is not, men don't as easily navigate to that place, to that space, to that openness, without someone creating that sense of safety. And for some reason, it seems to happen more seamlessly when there are only men in the room, and there are enough men in the room who are willing to take the first step, and show that vulnerability and openness and so on. That kind of gives permission for everyone else.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's I'm seeing it in so many different other aspects of my friendship circles, especially now that I think I'm exploring this with more intention than I ever have before. And then just looking back at the way that I was brought up, that, there are these dogmas that we get brought up that, like men are strong. And I mean, one of the reasons why my cancer was as aggressive as it was is because I was toughing it out. And, like the pain is fine, I can deal with it and everything like that. And it's being able to kind of, I suppose, debunk those old beliefs and to be able to kind of just forge a new model. And I've often had a conversation with my father. Like, no one taught him to be this healthy masculine leader, and he did his best that he could in raising a son. And at the moment, like, we're sitting in a place where it just, if I'm going to be truthful, like, we've never really been taught what it is to be a man. And I went on this thing called Mankind Project, and it was phenomenal, because when I came out of the other side, Rob, it was something that was just, I mean, it still kind of like really flipped my my understanding of what it is to be a man, because we went through this experience and we played with specific archetypes, and then we got to the end of it, and I was like, wow, there is nothing in society. There's nothing in my kind of I look at my ancestral kind of lead up to this life, preparing me for all of that. And suddenly there was this landing in my head that was just like, sure, but this is what it is to be a man. It's to be powerful, is to be open, to be honest, to be truthful about failures, but it's to be able to get up and keep moving forward, but with all of those other kind of elements towards it. And it's just, I look at society now, and you've got leaders like Trump, you've got, we had Zuma, and they're these real, I feel for parents these days as well, because, who they looking up to at the moment is something that is are models of masculinity that really don't seem to resonate with the balance that we need. But I suppose, in the way that nature is so magic, you kind of go off kilter, the pendulum swings this way, and like your analogy with the wolves, that they kind of took out that lead because there was too much of the control and the power side of things. I find it so fascinating that there's so much coming up around the masculine now, and there's so much of a thread of this incorporating the feminine within men, and it's just again, here I go. I just find it lost that thought again, Rob.
Well, let's stay with that, Breda. I mean, I think it's like, because for me, this could be an interesting part to not edit out. As an example, it's like where there is, what's happening is that there's a thought and that there's a desire to create a kind of cohesive set of logic that can naturally flow from one topic to the next, and that the audience will continue to feel fully engaged.
And can I be honest and just make a pause here? So I'm just gonna like put a little bit of nerve-wracking honesty and vulnerability in here.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
Rob, I regard you as somebody who's highly successful in business. You are, I mean, you're one of those rare people who've had the will and the intention to get where you've gotten in business. You've sold the business, and you're now building another business base. And when I look at it, it's innovative ways to be able to kind of move society ahead, which is something I really admire in you. You, in my mind, are very powerful in your masculine. I'm overwhelmed by I suppose the alpha males in my life. You're somebody who has helped me heal and is helping me heal that to such a massive degree at the moment that I think there's some moments that I'm intimidated by the potential of who you are and who I see other leaders to be, which I don't resonate with. So I think I get stuck into what I'm expected to do, more so because I'm with somebody who I admire, who's got a integrated masculine as I see it. And I think this is something that I think I personally struggle with, around that balance between incorporating a healthy version of masculine, which would take you almost off the pedestal that sometimes I put you on, I realize sometimes, and then that kind of even setting. So I find that I kind of play into the story of, because Rob's good at business, because Rob's been fearless at building the life that he's wanted to live, very, very consciously using masculine energy, that might attach to some of what I see in the leaders of today, which I struggle with, which is Trump, which is why we're having such challenges with, in my view, male white political leaders in the world, that there's almost a new way that I need to learn through people like you, and men who meditate, that allow, like, the truth that I've just spoken to be okay to be spoken. Do you know what I'm saying?
That was
I feel
beautiful, man.
so fearful of putting this into this podcast, to be honest with you, because it brings up so much fear that I am not man enough. Do you know what I'm saying? And I can feel it in my body right now, of this anxiety around what other men are going to see within me when I'm sitting with a very integrated wolf.
Right. I mean, a few things. First of all, just thank you. That was, for me, and I really appreciate you saying things like learning from me and so on. That moment right there, that just happened, for me, is by far the most powerful part of this hour plus engagement that we've just had. The realness and the strength of character that it takes in order to bring that sort of thing up and put it on the table for the entire audience to take part in. That is integrated masculine. That is a strength of character that is so powerful. And I think that this is part of what we're getting to. It's like that there isn't this kind of like there isn't a way that it needs to be. There isn't only one place that can define success, and one kind of external set of circumstances or achievements and so on that constitute success. It's the bravery to actually go in and to speak about this stuff, and to be willing to put it all on the table in this journey that we're all on as humans. It's like what are we doing if we're not figuring out how this all works? I don't know. There's some very interesting cultural forces that have shaped us to feel like there is a set criteria for what constitutes success. And for me, that's the most interesting thing to start to unpick, because right now, as I see it, that is success. Like what you just did there, that's success. That is power. That is integrated masculinity. And yet there's this kind of cultural construct that, in fact, what success is and so on is like, well, you've made some money and you've whatever those things are. And so what I'm certainly not trying to do is to cast aside the feelings that you have, because I think that myself and you and many other people have those feelings on the regular.
Yeah.
but I just, for me, that was amazing, dude.
Well, thank you for giving me the safe space to be able to do it, Rob. I think honestly, from the experience that I've had since I've known you, and where the journey that we've kind of walked up to this point, it's something that is, I think, landing more and more that this importance to be able to just put these truths and these insecurities out there, so that, because once I've kind of done that, it just feels like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm literally making all of this stuff up, and every project that I'm in, or the life that I'm leading at the moment, and to be able to be okay. And I really respect, and thank you very much for honoring that. Because being able to kind of speak this sort of truth, I do feel is it's the most relief for me, because I can let go of that, and it's so indoctrinated in me from all the masculine examples that I've had in the past, that you just don't do that. You don't show your shadow, you don't show your fears, you don't show your insecurities, you don't show that you're not worthy, even when you're in the process of actually letting those go by being honest about them. So it's yeah. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
No, thank you. Something that was said on the week and just for the listeners' reference, we had a Men Who Meditate weekend. I think it was two weekends ago, where a small group of us went away. And one of the intentional conversations we had was, what's your greatest shame, and what's your greatest fear? And one of the things that came up in that as a discussion kind of afterwards, when we were kind of reflecting on it the next day, was that shame can only exist in silence. And I thought that was just the most profound thing that I've heard. I can't remember who said it. It may have been Zane, but it's like that sense of shame, that sense of like unworthiness, not quite being good enough, whatever the case may be, can only quite literally exist in silence. And even in what you just did now, which is just putting it all on the damn table, it's like, that is such an incredible step towards healing. And I don't know intimately your relationship with men over the years and your upbringing and so on. But like, one thing I'm certain of is that it's these sorts of moments that take us step by step closer and closer towards full integration, and take the power and the stranglehold that these emotions have on us away, because we put a little bit of distance between ourselves and those emotions every time it happens, to the point where you can eventually look at it across the room and see it for what it is, and it disappears. And I think I shared this with you, but after I shared one of my greatest points of shame with the group, I haven't slept like that in months. I mean, really, like I've had like a week of just incredible sleep straight after that, because it's just like I would wake up and those 2-3 a.m. thoughts that are often running through your mind, it was just gone because I'd shared it. I'd shared it with a group of people who didn't judge me, who saw that I'm just another imperfect human who's trying to figure this shit out, and who is willing to just put it on the table. And there's something so profound and so powerful about just sharing the truth, the flippin' truth, the truth that you're too scared almost to admit to yourself in the shadows and in the darkness of night that exists. And when you put it into the light of day, with a group of people who care about you, who are willing to accept you regardless of that, I don't know what makes that happen, Brett, but it is profound. So again, thank you for leading by example there, man.
Rob, I just I mean, I just really want to honor, the success that you've had in business pales into comparison to how you show up in the world, that gives other people permission to be authentic. And it's something that you hold, and that is the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you, that I respect most in you. So thanks, I just really like to honor that, because it's it's through leading by example, because you were the first to lead on that weekend, and by example with what was going on for you, and it allowed all the rest of us to get past those demons, and to be able to kind of speak that openness about what we're fearing, or what we're going through, or what we've been through that's really hard, that just needs to be witnessed. And that just has brought for me so much relief. I mean, I can't even tell you what has happened for me around what I shared with you that has given me a perspective shift that also I think came from Zane was perspective is love. And I mean, the levels of meaning of that are amazing, but that, that, yeah, that was given to me. You started that, and I really appreciate the kind of openness by leading, for example, because it is something that I think our world needs a lot more of, is the courage to be able to speak around the things that we spoke of that night, that just allow us to be.
And it was amazing, isn't it? I mean, Brett, it's like, I think we started at was it about 6 or 7 that we started around the campfire with that discussion? I think we finished at like 12 or 1.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. And that's just, again, for the listeners, that was a group of six guys around the campfire. It's amazing that, and I don't think this is any sort of insightful revelation, but like, we've all got to carry so much, that even just like creating that space, it's like, it almost like we had to eventually just shut it down because everyone was falling asleep. It had already been a long day, but it's like it's almost like there's a backlog within us that we hold both in our psyches as well as in our bodies, that like can be cleared and again, I find it just absolutely staggering that it's like just sharing is an unbelievable step forward. Like it's like, it's probably 80% of it is just sharing and being accepted regardless of it. And like, maybe then there's a little bit of assistance that you can get on top of that with like a really accomplished psychoanalyst and so on, who can pull the threads together. But like, actually, at least my sense is that a lot of like, the therapy that you and I find so beneficial is just because there's someone there that listens and will accept us regardless. And, if we can create more communities and more cultures of men around, men, women, everything in between around us, that can encourage and accept that level of honesty. It's like, I think that's 80% of the healing that we need.
Yeah, I mean, the catharsis that I had after that, and the effect of that has just been. I mean, I've been journaling since that weekend, and it's just phenomenal what is kind of the insights that have come from just that sharing. And it's so simple, yet for the most part, like, so uncommon.
Totally, man.
But yeah, Rob, look, I mean, I think that's a good juncture to kind of close this off. I'd just like to really honor you for having this conversation honestly with me, for being vulnerable and honest around what you've going through, who you are, the value of therapy, and all the aspects of who you are. You're shown with such courage always. It's what leadership is for me.
Well, thank you, Brett. Thanks for the opportunity to come and to share and to talk about a subject that is actually quite tricky. Like the masculine feminine thing is also very politically charged at the moment, and so like it's an amazing thing to have an opportunity to just speak freely about it and use it as another opportunity to explore. So thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
You biscuit boy. So I hope this podcast was interesting, and I hope there was some resonance for you. Still having watched the podcast after a week after having recorded it, there is some vulnerability around that moment that, number one, is very uncomfortable, but in kind of sitting with it, I understand it to be a great, important, and necessary stretch for me to be able to, as Rob spoke about, start to access the full spectrum of the masculine as well as the feminine, and to strive for a little bit more balance, that I might show up as a more effective, more balanced, more purposeful male in the world. So that was one of the real notables for me. what I also would like to just kind of point out or highlight that is really resonant for me, that I'm starting to see mirrored with other very prominent people who seem to have a level of wisdom beyond themselves. And one is Zach Bush, MD. He's one of those phenomenal doctors in the world that has a very deep understanding around how life works, and he looks constantly at nature to get an example or model around what can serve us going through these challenging times that we're in at the moment, that can bring us into harmony with nature, within ourselves, within the communities that we participate in, the countries that we're in as well. So this point around connecting to nature, I thought very powerful of Rob to bring up. And if you're interested more, following Zach Bush is another amazing human being who just constantly starts reflecting the majesty and the incredible sophistication that nature can teach us around harmony. The other thing I'd like to kind of point out, or that really struck me, was the unit of measure that Rob speaks about, which I think is such a fantastic tool to be able to grow in awareness around not only the masculine and feminine balance that is within us, but are we giving ourselves what we need within a period of a month's time that will give us a life of health. And being in the health space, I'm very acutely aware that when we get off sync in any area of our lives, that can essentially grow to a great imbalance that would then start being reflected within our physical health. So I feel that is such a great tool of reviewing your month, of what you have done to feed yourself in all aspects of who you are. Great tool. The Men Who Meditate, I found the vision, or when Rob spoke to the vision of, just this, and what seemed like an informal but intentional gathering of a group of men, and now has been distilled into a new format, and moving forward, that we might evolve that into a space where we're able to connect with not only this feminine and masculine energy that we spoke to, but a real integral way of dealing with one another that is more compassionate, which is something I'm quite fierce about. So I believe that even if it's not Men Who Meditate, it might be a group of girlfriends, or it might be a group of sportsmen who connect and who allow that safety in that space to be able to speak a lot of their truths and to land in themselves with more compassion. So I also found this process that I'm consciously going through at the moment to be one that is very rich in being able to grow me into a more inclusive way of living, and respectful, and as I mentioned, that Rob models so well, just being the best version of myself that I can grow into in this lifetime. And I suppose I'm going to leave it off there. Thank you for watching this far. Thank you for your eyes and your ears. Once again, I don't take for granted the fact that you've listened to over an hour of my curiosity with Rob, experientially. Thank you for that. And I wish you fierce compassion and fierce resilience in these challenging times, and to take care of yourselves as a massive priority. And all the very best for this day.